In just 12 days, over 6,000 tanks clashed in the most brutal mechanized warfare the world has ever witnessed. A battle so massive it involved 2.5 million soldiers and changed the course of World War II forever. This was Kursk, where powerful tanks battled and the future of nations hung in the balance. The summer of 1943 marked a critical turning point for Nazi Germany. After the devastating defeat at Stalingrad, Hitler's war machine was wounded but not broken. He needed a decisive victory to restore German dominance on the Eastern Front, and he believed he had found it in a small Soviet city called Kursk. The Kursk salient was a tempting target, surrounded on three sides by German forces. Hitler saw an opportunity to encircle and destroy an entire Soviet army group in one devastating blow. The German plan, codenamed Operation Citadel, was deceptively simple. Two massive armored spearheads would strike simultaneously from north and south, meeting behind Soviet lines to complete the encirclement. It would be a repeat of the successful Blitzkrieg tactics that had brought Germany stunning victories in the early years of the war. But this time, things would be different. Unknown to the Germans, the Soviets had been preparing for this assault for months. By gathering information, scouting the battlefield, and thinking ahead, Stalin and his generals knew exactly what was coming. The question wasn't whether the Germans would attack Kursk, but when and how. Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the architect of the defense of Moscow and the victor of Stalingrad, masterminded the Soviet response. The preparations were staggering. Soviet engineers constructed 8 defensive lines stretching back 180 miles from the front. They laid over 400,000 mines, dug 5,000 miles of trenches, and positioned thousands of anti-tank guns in carefully concealed positions. Villages were fortified, forests were turned into killing fields, and every hill became a potential fortress. But the Germans weren't idle either. They assembled the most powerful armored force in military history. Over 2,700 tanks and assault guns were concentrated for the assault, including the fearsome new Tiger tanks with their 88mm guns and nearly impenetrable armor. The Panzer IV and Panzer III, veterans of countless battles, were joined by the massive Ferdinand tank destroyers and the experimental Panther tanks, making their combat debut. But what do you think was the most feared weapon on the battlefield at Kursk? If you guessed the Tiger tank, you'd be wrong. It was actually the humble Soviet anti-tank rifle, the PTR-D41. While it couldn't go through a Tiger's frontal armor, it could disable the tank's tracks, optics, and external equipment, leaving them helpless targets for heavier weapons. The German offensive began at dawn on July 5, 1943. The bombardment was so intense that Soviet soldiers described it as hell on earth, with explosions so close together they sounded like continuous thunder. Then came the tanks. From the north, Army Group Center's 9th Army, commanded by General Walter Model, launched their assault with 335,000 men and 590 tanks. The attack immediately ran into trouble. The Soviet defenses were deeper and more sophisticated than anything the Germans had encountered before. For every position they captured, another seemed to appear behind it. The southern attack was even more massive. Army Group South's 4th Panzer Army and Army Detachment Kempf, under the command of General Hermann Hoth, struck with 350,000 men and over 1,100 tanks. Initially, they made better progress, but the cost was terrible. Soviet defenders fought with desperate courage, often continuing to fire their weapons even as German tanks rolled over their positions. One of the most striking features of the battle was the sheer magnitude of the armored forces engaged, with over 1,000 tanks across a battlefield that spanned dozens of miles. Coordinating such an immense force was a monumental task, especially when radio communications were frequently disrupted by enemy jamming and the relentless confusion of combat. In many cases, tank commanders had to abandon technology altogether, resorting instead to flag signals, hand gestures, and on-the-spot improvisation to keep their units moving in unison. The Soviets, however, were not unprepared. They had spent months analyzing German tactics, pinpointing vulnerabilities in enemy armor, and devising strategies to counter the fearsome Tiger tanks that had wreaked havoc in earlier confrontations. But here's where the story takes a twist. To keep their defenses at Kursk hidden, the Soviets launched one of the war's boldest deception operations. They built fake airfields, deployed dummy tanks, used camouflage, and even generated false radio traffic to mislead German intelligence. The Germans were tricked into thinking Kursk was lightly defended, when in fact, it was the most fortified spot in the Soviet Union. So when they attacked, expecting an easy victory, They ran into the largest Soviet armor force ever assembled, walking straight into a trap. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the German offensive was losing momentum. The northern attack stalled completely after just 3 days, having advanced only 1 mile at a cost of over 200 tanks. The southern attack made better progress, but at an equally terrible price. By July 10th, the Germans had lost over 1,000 tanks and 100,000 casualties. The climax came on July 12th, 1943, near the small village of Procarovka. Here, the German 2nd SS Panzer Corps, spearheaded by the elite Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler Division, collided head-on with the Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army. What followed was the largest tank battle in history. Over 1,200 tanks clashed in an area no larger than a few square miles. The fighting was so intense that tank crews reported seeing enemy vehicles only meters away through the smoke and dust. Tanks rammed each other when they ran out of ammunition. Crews fought with pistols and hand grenades when their main guns were disabled. Soviet T-34 tanks, lighter and more maneuverable than their German counterparts, adopted desperate tactics to overcome the Tigers' superior armor and firepower. They would charge at full speed, trying to get close enough for their 76mm guns to penetrate the German tank's side armor. Many Soviet tanks were destroyed in these suicidal charges, but enough broke through to turn the tide of battle. Yet the most striking aspect of Procarovka wasn't the scale of destruction. It was the sheer courage displayed by both sides. German tank crews, many of them veterans of campaigns in Poland, France, and Russia, fought with the skill and determination that had made them the most feared armored force in the world. Soviet tankers, many of them barely out of training, displayed a reckless bravery that astounded even their enemies. As the sun set on July 12th, the battlefield fell silent. Both sides had fought themselves to exhaustion. The Germans had lost over 300 tanks, the Soviets even more. But there was a crucial difference. The Soviets could replace their losses, the Germans could not. But what do you think happened to the crews of destroyed tanks? Many people assumed they were killed, but the reality was quite different. Tank crews had surprisingly high survival rates, even when their vehicles were destroyed. The real killer wasn't enemy fire, but the intense heat and toxic fumes inside burning tanks. Many crews died not from wounds, but from carbon monoxide poisoning and heat stroke. Hitler, watching his offensive grind to a halt, made a fateful decision. On July 13th, he called off Operation Citadel. The German war machine had finally met its match. The Battle of Kursk was over, but its consequences would echo through the remainder of the war. The statistics are staggering. In just 12 days of fighting, the Germans lost over 1,600 tanks and 70,000 casualties. The Soviets lost even more tanks, over 1,800. But they had successfully stopped the German offensive and preserved their ability to continue fighting. More importantly, they had broken the myth of German invincibility. The aftermath of Kursk marked a turning point in World War II. Never again would the German army launch a major offensive on the Eastern Front. From this point forward, they would be constantly on the defensive, fighting a losing battle against an increasingly powerful Soviet war machine. Within days of the battle's end, the Soviets launched their own offensive, Operation Polkovets-Rumyantsev, which pushed German forces back hundreds of miles. The initiative on the Eastern Front had permanently shifted to the Soviet Union. The long road to Berlin had begun. So what other battles do you think changed the course of World War II? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most pivotal moments, make sure to subscribe for more stories from the battlefield that shaped our world. And if you're hungry for more, don't miss our next video on the Battle of Stalingrad, another turning point that changed everything.